Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca, and this is my research presentation for Morningside College. And my topic that I looked at was what was the effect of repeated reading in a class-wide fluency intervention? The main problem for the reason for my study was that reading proficiency is low across the country. The National Assessment of Educational Progress reports that 2.7 million eighth graders cannot read at grade level. This is further compacted by the National Reading Panel, determined that fluency is a critical pillar for students to be proficient in reading, and determining factors in students' proficiency levels is based upon their ability to be fluent readers. So in order to be able to read at a fluent rate in middle school and high school, and even college, you need to have that foundation of fluency down pat. Why this topic? So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. My district uses the FAST screener. We always take student scores for how many words per minute they can read in the fall, winter, and spring. We have a benchmark number. We don't really, sometimes we share it with them, but for the most part, we just tell them to go in, they read through passages, they try to read it fast. So for me, I wanted to take a moment, try to break down fluency for my students and get them to see, yes, you do have to be a fast reader, but you don't have to just only read fast. It's also about your tone, your accuracy, your rate. There is expression. So there's so much more that goes into fluency rather than just reading fast and reading through words. My lit review started with students not meeting reading proficiency in elementary school will not be proficient in secondary and post-secondary school. And this is what I saw over and over again. The farther behind a student falls in grade school, the farther behind they get in middle school and then high school, and then college is hard if a student can even go to college. It creates just a large gap between proficient students and not proficient students. So a lot of the studies that I read said that we need to provide fluency interventions at a young age. So it needs to start in elementary school. And interventions need to be started and followed through. So we're not just talking a couple of weeks in a classroom. This needs to be followed through throughout the student's elementary career. Past interventions have been ineffective. Some of the reading fluency interventions that I read about were just trying to push students for speed. They gave them a magical number. They tried to read as fast as they could, get through the passages, and see if they could hit that number. There was also another study that I read that compared students in one group. They were given three passages. They were told not to worry about the benchmark score, just to read for fluency, mark down their score. The next day, given new passages, mark down their scores. The next day, given new passages. And then there was another group of students who were not allowed new passages until the magic number had been hit. And so these students in the other group ended up with passages for several days in a row. Sometimes some students didn't even get to have a different passage the entire study. So it created a lot of frustration between the two groups. It just didn't really seem like it was a study that worked very well. And then there was another study that suggested students are not getting enough positive feedback. So my purpose statement was the purpose of the study is to answer the following research question. What is the effect of repeated reading using a class-wide intervention on reading fluency among students? The framework that I chose to focus on was the socioculture theory perspective. The second I read this theory about students learning from each other, benefiting more from growing and learning from one another, the more I knew that this was going to be what would work. So it says that students who learn from each other show more growth than students who do not. In my study, I had students take on both roles. I had students take on the teacher role and the student role. One would read, the other would listen and give feedback. When students can become teachers to one another, they will benefit more than if they are just working by themselves. And there was another study that supported this theory and said that students actually develop more vocabulary than other students when they're learning from each other. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The goals and objectives. So my study aims to answer the following research question. What is the effect of repeated reading using a class-wide intervention of reading fluency among students? The independent variable was repeated reading versus varied reading. The dependent variable was reading fluency measured by words per minute. And my measurement device was the FAST CBMR system, the curricular-based measurement in reading. The hypothesis that I started with was that repeated reading using a class-wide intervention will increase reading fluency among fourth grade students. So I, in the very beginning, predicted that repeated reading would have more of an effect in growth in words per minute for students than varied reading. I chose to do an ABC study, and this gave me the opportunity to compare my baseline phase A to phase B. So I gave them 4 weeks of intervention, and then I ended phase B. I got their words per minute, and phase B was repeated reading, and then I moved on to varied reading for the next 4 weeks, and they only did varied reading, and then I got another data set of words per minute at the end of phase C. So phase A was compared to phase B was compared to phase C. So that way I could see what had the greater effect, repeated reading or varied reading. My participants were 18 fourth graders who attend elementary in Iowa. There were 3 students in ELL, 3 students with an IEP, and 3 students identified as TAG. The materials that I needed were reading passages for each student. So passages were at each student's reading level. They got new passages every single day for each student. Whether it was the repeated reading passages, they would get a new set of 3 every single day, or the varied reading, they'd get 3 varied reading passages one day, then the next day 3 different varied reading passages, then the next day 3 more varied reading passages, and so on and so forth. Each student got a timer so that they could time each other reading for 1 minute. And then the curriculum-based reading measurement system. I used the FAST CBMR system to get my baseline, phase A, to get phase B after repeated reading, and to get phase C after varied reading. The procedure was that student baseline was taken from their fall CBMR fluency scores, so phase A. So I got a baseline of where they were starting fourth grade at. Then I provided 4 weeks of partner fluency intervention, 4 days per week for 10 minutes per day of repeated reading. This was phase B. After phase B, I used the CBMR to assess students' words per minute. Then we went on to 4 weeks of partner fluency intervention using varied reading passages for 4 days per week at 10 minutes per day. And that was phase C. After phase C, students' words per minute were assessed. The data analysis. I used the FastBridge reading system to determine growth for each individual student's words per minute. And from there, I was able to determine an average of how well my class did, how many words per minute they grew. The data on the words per minute was analyzed from phase A to B and then phase B to C to see which phase caused more growth. The baseline was compared to phase B, and phase B was compared to phase C. My results. I did a t-test, and this was from phase A to B right here. So we see at the end of 4 weeks of repeated reading intervention, my students had quite a bit of growth. They, on average, grew 4.67 words per minute. Then we moved on to 4 weeks of varied reading, and here is their results. This is what they grew. Shoot. They grew 2.7 words per minute on average. So we already see, just looking at the graph and looking at how many words per minute they grew, repeated reading had more of an effect on my students than the varied reading intervention. The implications. The biggest implication is that reading fluency interventions can increase a student's words per minute when students work on in pairs to read repeated readings. So that's really what I took from this. I think the pairs working together, the repeated reading obviously had more of an effect than the varied reading. So for me as a teacher, that's my biggest takeaway, is that if I can dedicate 10 minutes of my day to pair students up, let them read passages, and it's going to increase their reading fluency. I think everybody can find 10 minutes in their day to spare, especially when the partners stay the same. They kind of get in a routine. They know exactly where to go, what to do. And then you can also tailor this a little bit more to where you can have them focus on rate or tone or expression or accuracy. The limitations of my study, the very first one was the time. I didn't feel like I had enough time. I got really excited when I saw that first 4 weeks and the growth that students had. And then when I saw the next 4 weeks, how it kind of flatlined for them, I wondered, had I been able to run the study for 8 weeks at the repeated reading, would have my students' scores doubled? I don't know. So that's the one thing that I would probably change. I would change to do this study a little bit longer and see if I could have any more of an impact on my students. And then also I looked at my sample size. I only had 18 students. Had I had more students to go off of, maybe more diversity in my classroom, who knows? The ABC study done in one classroom, if I were to do this all over again, I would probably want to see if I could have all the 4th grade sections do this study together and see if the 10 minutes across the span of the 4th graders would make a difference, if I would see the same results, having more students to draw numbers from. And the last piece that I would change, I would just change the way that students recorded their own scores. So with my study, they just read, they marked down how many words per minute that they read. I would have added more of a self-growth piece. So maybe they could see like a chart. They would be able to graph their results. That way they could have that visible, tangible graph in front of them to see, oh, my numbers are increasing. I am reading at a higher rate. This is working. Let's keep it up. I think maybe that would just help keep them serious and accountable for the fluency intervention. So that's really all I have for you today. I feel like I learned a lot over the course of the last year and running the study in my classroom. And I hope that you picked up something as well. Thank you.